Thank you for taking the time to watch this webinar. My name is Emma Mamo and I am Head of Workplace Wellbeing at Mind, the mental health charity. Mind provides advice and support to empower anyone experiencing a mental health problem. It also campaigns to improve services, raise awareness and promote understanding of mental health. Mind is leading a brand new project called the Blue Light Programme, which is dedicated to helping support the mental health of emergency service personnel across England. So that includes staff and volunteers working within the fire and rescue service, the police service, ambulance, and then also search and rescue services. The programme will focus on raising awareness and tackling stigma within the services, and then helping personnel to build their resilience to help them manage their mental health at work, and then also providing training for managers and team leaders so they can better support staff, and then also providing information and support to all who need it. This webinar and others in the series have been made specifically for emergency services personnel. In this webinar, we will talk about mental health in the workplace, what are the key factors that can affect our mental health at work, and then how to put in place a comprehensive strategy to support staff in their mental health. So what do we mean when we talk about mental health? So we all have it the same as we have our physical health. It exists on a spectrum and we move along it from good to poor. And it is affected by many things in life, both in and out of work, but they can also just happen. And I will say that mental well-being is just as important as our physical well-being, and maintaining both is an important part of staying fit and healthy. And they also both directly impact on our ability to achieve and maintain quality of life. Mind knows that 1 in 4 of us will experience a mental health problem in any given year. So mental health and well-being is of great importance to all of us, not only in understanding our own mental health, but also that of others we will undoubtedly come into contact with. So that's colleagues, general public, and so on. Mind is also aware that there are over 220,000 emergency service personnel working across England. So it's likely that a quarter of these people will experience mental ill health every year. However, we also appreciate that the prevalence of mental health problems could be slightly higher because of the challenging nature of your roles. However, we conducted a recent survey of over 3,500 blue light personnel, and we found that 87% said they had experienced stress, low mood, or poor mental health while working within the emergency services. And also we found that 35% of fire and rescue personnel said they had taken time off due to stress, low mood, or poor mental health. So this suggests that working in the fire and rescue service means that you are particularly vulnerable to having your mental health affected. And we also learned that emergency service personnel work hard to prevent their poor mental health affecting their performance at work, very conscious of not putting extra burden on other members of the team and so on. But this means that it can come at a real cost in terms of their personal lives, impacting on their relationships and their physical health. So a real cause for concern. As part of the survey, we wanted to also find out, what is causing personnel to experience poor mental health, what's putting the pressure on. So when we asked people to identify the aspects of their role that had the biggest impact on their mental health, fire and rescue personnel told us that it was pressure from management or lack of support from management. But we also surveyed managers and they said that they feel a huge amount of pressure. So there's some real concerns there just at every level really. And then also lots of changes to how the fire and rescue service is being run and how people carry out their roles. So changes to shift patterns, changes to the traditional way of working, reduction of the numbers of personnel, and then low morale linked to that. But then also a lack of communication or good communication around all these changes, which can feed a real sense of uncertainty, which of course impacts on people's mental health. And then just thinking about, the everyday nature of your role, dealing with what can be quite distressing or traumatic events. And then also the pressure of working in what might be seen as quite a macho culture. And then feeling able to feel comfortable to talk about times when you might be struggling can be a real challenge working within the fire and rescue service. And then linked to this is around, not just the culture around talking about mental health, but just having poor working relationships, potentially with colleagues and so on. And then feeling undervalued and thinking of people reflected back to us around, retirement age increasing and having to work for an extended period of employment within the fire and rescue service, but having to maintain levels of kind of physical and mental agility and ability. So that's a real concern for people at the moment. And then just that idea of work-life balance, managing the conflicting demands in and out of work and juggling all of that. And then what was quite interesting for fire personnel that they flagged up in addition to this is around financial worries such as changes to pensions, and then unmanageable expectations from the general public. This idea about how the fire service is run and what people can expect from it, and saying there's a bit of a disconnect there with what the general public feel you should be providing and the impact that can have. So there's quite a few issues going on at the moment for people, staff and volunteers working within the fire and rescue service. So in terms of how we feel that the fire and rescue service should respond to this and what employers and managers and so on need to put in place, Mind would recommend a comprehensive strategy that is reflected in all practices, policies and management procedures. And it needs to be rolled out across all levels of responsibility within the organisation. So the first part of the kind of comprehensive strategy is around promoting well-being to everyone across the service. As I said earlier, we all have mental health, same as we have physical health, so you need to support people to have good mental health at work. And then the second part of it is identifying and tackling the causes of work-related mental health problems. So being able to recognise the signs that people might be struggling, and then thinking about how you can support people, but then also looking in that wider sense of how you can manage organisational change and so on, so it doesn't have such an impact. And then the final part is around having the right policies and practices in place to support people who might be experiencing a mental health problem, no matter where they are on the spectrum. It could be dealing with a workplace pressure, stress kind of issue, or dealing with emotional distress linked to potentially a life event like a bereavement or relationship breakdown, or then just if someone is living with a mental health problem and just supporting them to manage that condition while working within the fire and rescue service. And in terms of supporting someone's mental health, as I said, the principles are about the same. It's not about where they are on the spectrum, it's just about understanding what that looks like for someone, how it impacts on their ability to do their job, but also how their job can impact on their ability to manage their mental health, and just looking through to identify solutions. But I'll talk about this in more detail in just a moment. But the final point I wanted to make around this issue is that senior leadership is crucial. Promoting a positive culture around mental health and being proactive about addressing this issue in your workplace really does need to come from the top. So in terms of how do you promote well-being, I'm going to now outline some general principles that we would recommend to all employers that we know supports people to have good mental health at work. However, these approaches and models, they can and do look different in different workplaces, and also some of them are harder to adopt in certain operating environments. But I think by outlining them, it can then be useful if they're not possible within your workplace, or if you need to kind of tweak it or adjust it. It's good as a food for thought to try and think through, well, how can you flex and change the way you kind of operate the service to better support people's mental health. So in order to foster a positive and healthy working culture, there are several steps that can be taken, including putting mental health on the agenda, so talking about mental well-being regularly, maybe trying to give people information about how to have good mental health, what do they need to do to sustain it. We all grow up being educated around how to be physically healthy. We're all told about healthy eating, exercise and so on, but we don't have that same comparable education about what we need to do to stay mentally healthy. So maybe introducing some information. There's lots on the Mind website that could help you with this. And then, as I was saying earlier, really strong leadership on this issue is key. So being positive and leaders kind of leading by example to generate and promote an open and clear culture that values personnel will be very valuable in this. And linked to this is sending clear messages, so supporting opportunities for staff to take time out and de-stress after challenging instances or challenging shifts and so on. I do recognise this isn't always possible if people are out and about, dealing with call-outs and so on, but it's important to be mindful of this when it is possible. And ensuring personnel take their annual leave, this is very important about that idea of one, having work-life balance, but also having that time to de-stress and kind of recharge your batteries outside of the workplace. And then supporting flexible working where at all possible. Obviously with how crews are run, this probably needs to be negotiated in consultation with other crew members, but just looking to see if you can offer flexible working. People often have, family responsibilities, potentially caring responsibilities, but also if someone is living with a mental health problem, then offering flexible working so they can help manage that could be helpful. And then with some of the issues that were reflected in our survey, this idea around organisational change and how that's managed. I think promoting open dialogue and involving personnel in decision making as much as possible would be really helpful, and linked to this, ensuring good, clear kind of communication and developing trust. I think that communicating effectively with your staff and colleagues is one of the most key aspects of creating a mentally healthy working culture. So spending time thinking about that and being mindful of that is really important. And then creating space for personnel to raise issues, whether home or work. I think it's important to promote an open culture, be approachable, an open door kind of policy, and be approachable, but also, respecting confidentially if people do share things. And I think that if it is a home issue that is going on for someone, it's not your job to solve that, but it's good for you to know the kind of context that people are dealing with, because, we can't leave things at home. People have, things if they're of concern or a worry that will impact on people's mental health in the workplace. So it's just understanding that and just making it okay to say, I'm struggling for this reason, for that reason, and so on. And I think it's also important to invest in your personnel, so prioritising learning and development and career development and getting them to expand their skill set is really important around having a sense of well-being in the workplace. And then promoting physical and social activities in and out of work. But thinking about in work, promoting social activities and physical activities with other colleagues will help build that kind of trust and positive, supportive culture that's important. And then encouraging and accommodating effective peer support. So at Mind, we have buddies set up for new starters. We also have mentors set up for when people maybe change within the organisation and go up a level. Then we also have kind of peer support where people can go and debrief after challenging calls or challenging interactions with the general public and so on. So building in some of those structures so people can seek support from colleagues, again, will build the right kind of culture around mental health and so on. So I've been talking about how you promote well-being. The next part, as I said, is around identifying and tackling the causes of work-related mental health problems in your organisation. And again, an organisational approach is key. So this needs to be reflected in your policies and practices, backed up by training for your managers and team leaders, so they can better understand mental health and how to support staff. So the first part is routinely taking stock of your personnel's mental well-being, so you can get a true sense of what's going on across your organisation. So regularly checking in with personnel, whether it's formally and regularly or just informally where appropriate, will allow you as an employer, but also if you're a manager and you're in a supervisory role, to understand what affects your personnel in their role. You can then get an idea of what you're doing well to support their mental health, so you can then build on it. But also identify factors or current ways of working that are negatively impacting on your personnel. So this can help you identify, what you need to address and plan for improvement, which in turn will increase productivity and enhance morale. So our top tips for tackling the causes of mental health problems at work include, as I was saying before, building your confidence on mental health so you feel comfortable to have these discussions with people. And then normalising mental health. So if you are checking in regularly and taking stock and having regular debriefs or supervisions with personnel, these really do contribute to building a sense of trust where people can speak openly about issues. And it also helps resolve issues early on and make sure they don't kind of escalate into a more serious issue. And by building in these kind of regular check-ins around well-being, as I said, you kind of make it business as usual to talk about these issues, so it doesn't feel like people have to raise their hands or it's an unusual thing to talk about. So linked to this is being available for your personnel, your crew or your watch, and then treating people as individuals so you're responsive to their needs. So in terms of the final part around how you support employees, as I said, if you've been kind of building your confidence and talking about these issues, you will feel more informed and more confident to tackle these issues, and in turn that will make you better equipped if people are experiencing a problem. You can then explore putting in place support measures or workplace adjustments to help people manage their mental health at work. In terms of what these can look like, they broadly fall into 3 categories. So one is changes to how people can perform their role, changes to the role itself, or the provision, and then finally the provision of extra support either by you as their supervisor or by colleagues. So in terms of changes to the role, so obviously this can depend on people's specific responsibilities and might need to be negotiated, but first and foremost it's about exploring what's going on with that person, what's impacting on their mental health, and also how it's impacting on their ability to do their job, so you can then see what you could put in place. But some examples might include changes to the shift start and finish times. For example, if someone's taking medication for their mental health, it can make them drowsy just after they take it, so that could be in the morning or the afternoon. So just thinking through whether you could offer any flexibility there. And then supporting them to take time out if they are struggling, even if only for a few minutes, can help someone maintain their resilience at work. And then providing some quiet rooms or quiet space where people can take that time out without interruption. And then potentially relaxing absence rules for those with disability-related absence. So I know in some organisations there are triggers if people take a certain amount of sick leave in a certain period, but you could look to relaxing that if it is related to a mental health problem that someone is living with, because obviously having that kind of routine trigger can act as a stressor to people and as a worry to people, so looking at that as a potential adjustment. And then maybe agreeing to give an employee leave at short notice if they do need to attend mental health appointments such as therapy or counselling. And then perhaps some changes to how they conduct their work, either permanently or in the short term, could include a reallocation of some tasks or changes to people's duties, or redeployment to a more suitable role. And then linked to this is maybe training and support to help them apply for vacancies or opportunities in other teams or in other roles. Line managers can also provide extra support through increased supervision, either formal or informal. I think it's mindful to maybe think about, I guess it's a judgment call about, you know, how to offer that support, and again it's to discuss with the individual. But some people engaging with the Blue Light programme within the fire and rescue said it's important that people aren't seen to be getting preferential treatment, and or for people to feel like they're being singled out or monitored and checked up on. So again, it's about understanding that individual and what would work for them. But if they are struggling, then having their supervisor or their manager look out for them a bit more might help them through that difficult period. And then potentially providing training, coaching or mentoring might be helpful. And then providing positive and constructive feedback. If people are struggling with their mental health, sometimes it can impact on their self-esteem. So building in some reflection on how well they are doing and the things that they are managing well can help counter that negativity. And then ensuring debriefing sessions take place after difficult incidences, so people can have time to process what happened, reflect on the course of action they took, and if there's any learning they need to take from that. But just helping people kind of process that and then, you know, leave work at work can be helpful. And then I think routinely reminding personnel of the wellbeing support that is available, either in work or out of work, can again help people to seek the support that's appropriate to them. Some colleagues may also find it beneficial to take part in a buddy system, so there's an identified colleague that they can go to if they're struggling, so having a kind of a person identified that they can go and talk to at any point and kind of share what's going on with them can be good. I mean, if you have created a positive culture, hopefully they will feel comfortable talking to their line manager. But in some ways it can be good for someone to have a nominated person within their team or watch that they can go and speak to about issues. It's just meaning they're getting the kind of support that's appropriate for them and helps them. And then I think in terms of whatever you do put in place to support someone, agreeing a time to come back and review it, be that a week, a couple of weeks, just so you can check in about what's helping, or if anything isn't helping, you know, whether you can tweak that slightly, I think would be good to agree. Ultimately, both providing and taking the time and space to address any mental health concerns or worries early on will go a long way to ensuring a more positive outcome for the person, for the individual you're supporting. So we've been talking about how you can offer support to someone. So it might be useful now to just take a moment to think about, well, how do you know if someone needs support? So observing the people in your watch, you may notice changes in them. However, I think it's important to note that people experience a mental health problem, even the same mental health problem, in a different way. And also there may be no outward sign that someone is experiencing a problem with their mental health. As I said earlier, the fire and rescue personnel that we surveyed said that they take a lot of effort to not let their mental health problems affect their performance in the workplace. So people might be hiding that they're struggling. Again, this is why it's really important to be really proactive on this issue and create the right kind of culture where people feel that their mental health is valued. So linked to that, if they are experiencing poor mental health, they will get support, and that will help them kind of raise issues sooner. But in terms of maybe identifying some potential indicators that someone might be struggling, so clues might include changes in their behaviour or their mood and how they engage with colleagues, changes in their appearance potentially. If people are struggling with low mood, they can struggle to take care of themselves, their personal kind of grooming and so on. And then experiencing a loss of motivation, and then maybe struggling to concentrate or make decisions, and then maybe withdrawing from their colleagues and not engaging with kind of banter can be an indicator that maybe someone is experiencing a problem. And then maybe changes in how they're smoking or eating, or potentially if they're drinking more as a way to cope. And also if you do become aware of any life events or changes in their circumstances in their personal life, so a breakdown in a relationship, a bereavement, then again, this might be a kind of sign that they might need some support. Again, that idea I was talking about, it's good to raise these issues with people, but again, it's about how you do it and the sensitivity and the empathy that you use, so people feel that they're not being monitored, that it is just about providing the right kind of support to people. So I think it might be useful to talk about, how should you broach a conversation about someone's mental health. So I think first and foremost, it's about finding the time and space to have these conversations, preferably as early on as possible so things don't escalate. And it's really simple, just asking people how they're doing, as you would for a physical health condition. And if you do this regularly, it becomes normal, part of the organisation's culture. And so it may be helpful to include questions about people's well-being in the kind of agenda for regular supervisions or debriefs. And it's key to use open questions, let the other person do the talking. So once you've begun such conversations, perhaps try some of the following, just acknowledging the issues that the persons have raised. Sometimes people just want to share their worries, and that in itself is as much support as they need. However, if they have raised issues around workplace problems and so on, identifying some positive steps to address the issues they've raised, make them achievable and appropriate, but suggesting some small steps that can be taken to address these issues. And then, as I said, looking to introduce some simple but realistic adjustments to someone's role, or perhaps that offer of extra support while they're struggling. Some other key pointers are, just be positive, focus on what they can do rather than what they can't. And involving them in finding solutions as much as possible would be useful. I think people are often the most expert in their needs and what would help them. And also, if people are experiencing poor mental health, they can often feel a loss of control. So then trying to put as much control back in their hands would help counter that. And then the final point I just wanted to make is around, it can be quite challenging to talk to someone about their mental health. It's quite a personal issue, it's quite sensitive. But I think, if you're in a team leader or a supervisory role, just having the confidence to ask them how they're doing, and when they say no, just having the confidence to just have a conversation with them about that and explore what you could put in place. You're not meant to be a health professional. It's just as simple as saying, okay, well, from what we've said today, from what you've shared with me, we've agreed that we're going to do X, Y, Z, and let's agree to review this in a week or a couple of days to see if it's working or not. And that's really all you can do, but that can be transformative. And I guess a final note is just about the fact that although you may have noticed changes in the person, you may be concerned about their mental health, so you think it's the right time to broach the conversation. For the person, it might not be the right time. Once you say something, you can't unsay it. And so although you're approaching them and trying to open up the conversation, it might not be the right time for them. So if they don't open up, I think, all you can leave them with is the positive note that, you have an open door. If anything has changed for them, if anything is going on for them, that you're always there to listen, and the service will respond and support them where they can. We're now going to hear from Peter O'Reilly, who is Chief at Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service.
Okay, my name is Peter O'Reilly. I'm the Chief Fire Officer of Greater Manchester Fire and Rescue Service. And I'm here to talk today a wee bit about the challenges that face personnel within the Fire and Rescue Service, and in particular how we deal as an organisation with those people who find challenges, especially around issues involving their mental health. The Fire and Rescue Service, obviously, as everybody will be aware, has to deal with a number of complicated types of incident. And a lot of these incidents, unfortunately, involve people who have been in severe distress. There's a lot of incidents that we attend where trauma is involved. And sometimes crews, firefighters can attend more than one incident a day, which in different ways they experience trauma in a very, very excessive and severe form. Obviously, as human beings, we are all different, and we find different ways of coping with having to see what most human beings don't have to see in their own careers. And the early days when I first joined the Fire and Rescue Service, the culture of the service then was that it was a man's world, and that you had to deal with it in your own way, and we all developed our own coping mechanisms. We're much more mature about these things now, and right from the outset we look to make sure that we try to help our staff as best we can. That starts in recruitment and selection, trying to make sure that we're recruiting the right people into the roles of firefighter, because we acknowledge that it is going to be challenging for their future. But even after recruitment, we have a number of various procedures within the organisation that help. Firefighters, when they attend traumatic incidents now, are automatically offered a critical incident debrief. They have access to an employee assistance programme, which is confidential. They can contact that on our intranet, or they can make a phone call, which again is private and confidential. They can experience critical incident debriefs, and those debriefs can be followed up afterwards. We find that they're very helpful, not only for individuals but for the team as well. We have a number of different connections in the different organisations, such as mine, where we're able to avail of expertise and being able to cope with a lot of the stresses that an organisation such as ours has to face. Myself, I've been through quite a number of different incidents where we know that it has affected us personally. One such incident that comes to mind was a road traffic incident in Northern Ireland when I was a firefighter there, and responded, and it involved a car, a small car, which contained 5 young people. The car was obviously going faster than it should have on the road, and it left the road and it hit a tree. The scene that faced us all when we arrived was one of complete devastation. The car had been ripped apart, and the young people, obviously been a lot softer than the car, were in a much worse state. 4 of those young people died from their injuries, and we as firefighters had to look after the scene for quite a long period after that. The impact it had on us then, which is still fresh in my mind today, some 12 years later, is that every one of us had young people that age, or in and around that age, that we knew, whether they were sons and daughters, or whether they were brothers, whether they were cousins, or whether they were neighbours. It was very impactful, and as a result of that, quite a number of the firefighters that attended the incident found it very hard to deal with. And it was probably our first experience of having to avail of additional services that were experts in this field to help us through it. It is challenging in a role as an emergency services member of staff. I think the Fire and Rescue Service now is in a completely different place. I think the mechanisms that we have within our own organisation The fact that we can, if we're worried about some of our staff, we can refer them to occupational health. The fact that if staff are concerned about themselves, that they have a number of avenues that they can follow to try and get help for themselves. I think the support arrangements we have within the organisation, the training that we give to our staff, especially our watch managers and crew managers around mental health awareness, the fact that we are linked into a lot of the mental health trusts now around Manchester. We are receiving reciprocal training. We're providing training to them on the risk of fire. They're providing training to our staff on how to look out for those areas around mental health, not only in the workforce but also in the communities that we engage with. I think the experiences that I had as a firefighter, as a young firefighter, as a young junior officer, have certainly put me in a position where mental health welfare is one of the priorities for me with the staff right across our organisation. And I'm hopeful now that the liaisons and the partnerships that we've created with other organisations, the relationship that we have with our own staff, the policies that we have in place within our organisation, and more importantly, the support functions that we have within our organisation and how they can help firefighters on the ground will all stand us in good stead and being able to have a healthy, engaged workforce that we're seen to be looking after at all times throughout their career.
Now, in terms of providing individual support to people, a really useful tool that can be used in the workplace context comes from a tool that people generally use with their health professional. So if someone's living with a mental health problem, they would develop a wellness recovery action plan with their health professional, which identifies what the person needs to do to help them maintain good mental health. And then it identifies what might cause them to start experiencing poor mental health again and what might be some early warning signs. And then it identifies what the individual needs to do and then what the health professional needs to do to support that person. So at Mind, we've kind of taken that tool and adjusted it so it's useful in a workplace context. So it helps people talk about, well, what does this look like for me in terms of managing my mental health at work? And it can also help facilitate these kind of conversations between, managers and team leaders and supervisors and the people they have pastoral responsibility for. And ultimately, it can help ensure that people get the right kind of support in the workplace. So we all need to support our mental health at work, whether we have a mental health problem or not. So all personnel could be offered a wellness action plan to develop in their role. And as I said, it can help people to be more open and seek support early on. And also by planning in advance, organisations can ensure that everyone receives the support they need when they need it. And the fact that it's so tailored to the individual, it means that you can kind of identify a ready-made package of support that can be rolled out when they start experiencing a problem. So it helps you really capture and address things early on. And because it identifies early warning signs that someone might be struggling, it also helps managers and leaders feel comfortable to broach these conversations because you've already identified some potential indicators. So you can say to the person, oh, we've already said if you are less chatty when you come into work, or if you do this or do that, then that might be a sign you're struggling with your mental health. So I'm just going to ask you, is something going on? Is there something we need to discuss? So it kind of gives permission to have these conversations and takes away that fear that you might be overstepping boundaries or potentially asking someone about, a home issue that's going on for them. And I will say at Mind, we have them rolled out for staff across the organisation. So if a member of staff is living with a mental health problem, then they will have a plan in place. But it's also offered to everybody who works at Mind. So we can all have that kind of individual support to manage our mental health. So as I was saying earlier, an action plan should cover the actions and behaviours that support the individual to have good mental health at work. And then it should identify some potential triggers for poor mental health. So what could cause that person to experience stress or pressure, or indeed, if they are living with a mental health problem, to identify some things that might impact negatively on their mental health. And then it identifies the early warning signs that the person might be struggling. And then it will talk about, the potential impact of the mental health problem on their ability to do their job. And then it should identify, well, what can we put in place to counter that? What else can we put in place to support the person? What can the supervisor do? But then also positive steps for the individual to take if they are experiencing poor mental health. and then a time that you both agree when you'll come back and review how it's working and if you need to make any adjustments. So they should be drafted by the employee but in conjunction with their manager or supervisor. And if someone is living with a mental health problem, then it might be useful to also involve their health professional in this. The WAP should be held confidentially and, as I said, regularly reviewed by the employee and their manager together. And the WAP allows a line manager or supervisor to agree with the employee about how they can be practically supported at work and how to address any health needs. So on the Mind website, we have a resource that explains this process and this approach in much more detail, as well as all the other issues that I've been covering in this webinar. And details for those resources will be given at the end of this webinar. So in terms of the support available to people, there is a range of support if people do want to speak to someone about their mental health or about any other issues they might have or any concerns, whether that's about work, relationships, health, money or other issues. First and foremost, it would be beneficial to talk to someone in your workplace, but obviously this would be more helpful if they are aware of mental health and its interaction with work. So a large part of what the Blue Light programme is trying to achieve is upskilling managers and leaders within Blue Light services so they are better able to have these conversations and create the right kind of culture to ensure that people get the right support at the right time. However, outside of work, there are also many sources of support available which personnel may find helpful, such as speaking to their GP or phoning the Mind Blue Light Info Line, which is a telephone helpline service which can give you information about different mental health conditions, treatment and support available, as well as specific support available in your local area. So details of this and other sources of support will be given at the end of this webinar. We hope that you have found viewing this webinar helpful. We have produced additional webinars in this series entitled Looking After Your Mental Health and General Mental Health Awareness, both of which are available to watch now and feature emergency service personnel talking about their experiences of managing their mental health at work. Please also take a few moments to give us your feedback by completing the short survey that immediately follows this webinar. It's really important to get your feedback so we can ensure the programme meets your needs. Mind has also created resources and information booklets specifically for the Blue Light services that cover these topics in more detail. These are available to you and your colleagues, so please share these as they may be of help to someone. Please note that at the end of this webinar there'll be details of all the information and support services available, including Mind's dedicated Blue Light Info Line. We are determined to reach as many emergency service personnel as we possibly can, so please ensure your colleagues are made aware of the Blue Light programme, the support and services available, and of course these webinars. Thank you for watching.